I'd like to call this zoning hearing to order. If you could all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilwoman Carumba, if you could please lead us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Councilwoman Carumba.
Present.
Councilwoman Carr.
Here.
Mayor Simmons.
Here.
Councilman Gibson.
Here.
Councilman Forbes.
Here. Okay, we're going to start. We're going to reverse the order. We're going to take up item B first. Derek, if you could kick us off, please.
Okay. Second item, first item is a zoning ordinance of the City of Bonita Springs approving an application PD 19-60292-BOS, amending the existing industrial development, plan development, Lee County zoning resolution number 98-071 as amended to expand the excavation limits and extend the termination dates for the existing mine consistent with state permits for a property of plus or minus 1,268 acres located at 25501 Bonita Grand Drive, Bonita Springs, Florida 34135, providing for an effective date. This is the second public hearing and adoption hearing for the BG Mine Industrial Planned Unit Development. And at this time, since this is a quasi-judicial hearing, I would ask anyone in the audience or on staff who intends to give any testimony, please raise their right hand and repeat after, affirm. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay. Thank you. There you go.
Thank you.
Applicants.
With that, we'll call Dr. Depew. He's been qualified as an expert in planning and zoning. And while he's getting ready, I would say that Mr. Depew has had extensive experience with natural resource extraction, so he's very familiar with the process and the requirements.
Doctor, are you intending us to see that, I'm sorry, your exhibit in front of us? I'm just
I
wondering.
may need to refer to it.
I was just going to say,
but
could we
I
maybe
would bring
put it up, or is that going to be?
I don't need it right now.
Okay.
If you have a question, Mr. Mayor, I will pull it up and we can refer to it, but I didn't want to have to turn my back.
No,
to you
wonder,
while
I was just
doing
going
the
to say if we
presentation.
needed to elevate it, but okay, thank you very much.
Well, we'll get it.
You go up to slide.
Yep. I'm trying to go to the one down below.
He's trying to do it.
Guys, quit fighting with each other.
Here we go.
I know who's doing what.
Council members, thank you. As Ms. Montgomery said, my name is David Depew. I'm here as the planning expert on behalf of BG Mine. I have appeared before you in the past. I'm not going to go into my credentials. I am a certified land planner and have been so since 1983, and I'm here in my guise as a planning expert for you today. That's probably as much as my background as you probably need. If you've got a question, I'll be happy to answer that when we get to those. I'm going to try and go through this a little bit quicker than I managed with the zoning board. The attorneys are very happy about that. The subject property, as you well know, is in the northeast corner of the city. It's shown here with the excavation lakes clearly visible as either the dark or the light green color that you see there. To the north is property that has been recently acquired by Lee County and is designated as density reduction groundwater resource. Similarly, the property to the east and the southeast are also designated DRGR. This is on the extreme northeast corner of the city, and just to the north and to the east and to the southeast is land that is under county jurisdiction. To the south are agricultural lands and some scattered residences. To the west is Citrus Park and Belle Villa. Beyond those two developments to the west are the BSU facilities and the Liberty Youth Ranch, and to the northwest are more agricultural lands and resource protection areas. Oops. The subject property is an ongoing lime rock mining operation. It was first permitted back in the 1980s. It was identified in Lee County's 2008 analysis undertaken by Dover Coal and Associates as one of the regional lime rock supply mines, and although technically within the city, the mine was nevertheless included on the county's map 14 in the Lee County plan, recognizing the areas that are appropriate for lime rock mines within Lee County. This is a list of the permits currently that the mine has gotten, and I'm not going to go through these. I just thought that when I actually pulled up our spreadsheet that showed the permits that have been obtained for the mine over the years, that it was kind of impressive. There are literally hundreds of different permits. In terms of background, the history of the mine is long and detailed. The site is approximately 1,268 acres in size. There are approximately 370 acres currently designated for conservation and already under easement. Those are primarily along the easterly boundary of the mine, and you see that kind of gray area along that area. But there are also some conservation areas that are interior to the mine, and they are noted as well in that kind of gray color in the aerial photograph. There are just under 400 acres of mine lakes on the property at the moment. The current future land use designation is under Lee County's density reduction and groundwater resources, as that category was defined in 2003 when the annexation took place. That future land use category allows natural resource extraction, mining, as a permissible use. Mining on the subject property was first approved in 1987 on the southern portion of the site, and in 1998, Resolution Z98-071 extended that mine footprint to the entirety of the 1,268 acres. Resolution Z-02-047 permitted the current operation to a depth of 90 feet below land surface, or the confining layer, whichever occurs first, and added uses to the mining operations. The settlement agreement with the city under which the request is moving forward today extends that date to 2041 to coincide with the FDEP permits that will also expire in 2041. Mine was annexed, as you know, into the city in May of 2003 pursuant to an annexation agreement that was adopted by the City Council in February of 2003. Also in 2003, the city recognized that the mining and associated uses were vested and permitted to continue on the project, despite the fact that the plan at the time did not allow mineral extraction uses with the city. Other events of significance include the emergency permit extensions that were done pursuant to Florida statute that occurred from 2012 through the present day that extended the overall life of the mine, as well as various modifications to the FDEP permits. Property remains designated as a significant resource for lime rock in Lee County. We took a look at distances to residential structures. As you can see, to the south, 1,425 feet is the closest residential structure, over a quarter mile. To the southwest, 1,882 feet, and to the northwest, 1,676 feet. The 2003 comprehensive plan for Lee County, which is the operative plan, is the one that controls the actual consistency determination. And what I did was I included a section of the statute that simply says that if the local jurisdiction has not adopted a specific land use designation for the property, the controlling regulations are those that were in place at the time of the annexation. The IPD that is before you today will increase the size of the excavation by approximately 299 acres, acknowledge the new expiration dates of the mine operations, and bring consistency between the city and the FDEP permits. No changes to the existing conditions are really being proposed. Staff has got a couple of edits to the conditions, and we don't have a problem with those, as we indicated yesterday at the zoning board. The most recent FDEP approval, which was in 2018, is consistent with the request before the City Council today, and all the conditions of Z-02-047, except the excavation area and the reservation for 951 extension, are intended to remain in full force and effect. Traffic volumes will remain unchanged. No new traffic is being added to the road network as a result of the request. The project phasing and reclamation remains unchanged other than the completion dates. And the request is intended to help meet the regional demand for growth that is the result of the growing population. This is a map of showing you the existing conditions. The hatched areas, which you can see are the dotted areas there, are the areas of preservation and under conservation easement. You can also see a little bit more clearly the areas interior to the mine that are also covered by the hatch areas. You can see the activity that's ongoing in the lakes that are there, and it's clear that there's activity taking place in virtually all of the lakes at this point. In this particular photograph, in order to blow it up, we've made north to the left, east is to the top, south is to the right, and then west is down on that. So it's been tilted a bit from the normal expectation. We've done quite a bit of study on the subsurface mines, the subsurface strata. There are basically 9 separate strata of geologic formations that exist in varying quantities across the site. The mineable lime rock ranges from between 10 feet to 108 feet below surface, with a confining layer of clay below the lowest layers of mineable limestone, and that confining layer ranges between 30 and 32 feet in depth, according to the core samples that we've gotten. According to the geological reports, mineable rock can be found in varying depths, as I said, to a maximum mineable depth of 90 feet below land surface, which is what the permits currently allow, and that is part of the current applicable conditions that limit the mine depth. Additionally, because the layers are variable across the site, if the confining clay layer is encountered at a depth of less than 90 feet, that becomes the maximum depth of mines. Under no circumstances can the clay layer be penetrated, and this will maintain the hydraulically significant confining layer that forms a barrier underneath the mine to the lower aquifers. Mining operations not expanding, but rather taking advantage of the full range of resources on the subject property. To that end, no additional trips are being proposed or added to the network. The trips from the mine have been there since, as I said, the mid-'80s, and they are now part of the traffic counts of background traffic that the city and the state and the county all undertake in this area. Both Bonita Grand Drive and East Terry Street currently operate at level of service D and are within the adopted levels of service specified by the comprehensive plan. As was seen in the aerial photograph of the current condition of the mine, the jurisdictional wetlands on the subject property have been delineated or being preserved, been placed into conservation easements, and the mine operators are maintaining them free of exotic vegetation. The perimeter berm that separates the mine from the preserve area to the east has been completed and is part of the MCP and is shown on the master concept plan. There are no changes to any of the preservation areas proposed by this amendment, and the monitoring wells that are required by Z-02-047 are in place. Monitoring is ongoing. The master concept plan depicts the location and the locations of the monitoring stations, and those are not proposed to change. The site is designed to retain all stormwater on the property, and that will not change. There's no discharge and thus no flooding associated with activities that take place on the subject property. These are some of the conditions. That's not all of them, but that's some of the conditions mandated under the current zoning approval. Maintenance of the machinery, blockage of noise generation, driver education for all of the truck drivers regarding routes to and from the mine and the need to stay off of East Terry Street. Physical speed controls have been placed on Bonita Grand Drive, and the ongoing water monitoring are all features of the existing operation. Under the regulations that were in place at the time Resolution Z-02-47 was approved, the Commission, using the same regulations which are now being reviewed for this request, found that the rezoning met or exceeded all performance and location standards, was consistent with the Lee Plan, was compatible, did not place an undue burden upon infrastructure, and would not adversely affect environmental or natural resources. They further found the proposed uses were appropriate for the location, the conditions provided were adequate safeguards for the public, and the conditions were reasonably associated and related to the impacts anticipated. The necessary urban services were available to service the mine insofar as they were required, and the deviations, none of which have changed in the current request, were conditioned sufficiently to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. This is the current master concept plan approved under Z-02-047. Again, on this one, north is to the left and south is to the right. East is at the top and west is at the bottom of the picture. This is now the most current site plan that was approved by the city under ADD-13-05138-BOS. And the lake areas were modified slightly to conform with what actually was being excavated out there, but the preservation areas are the same. This is the proposed master concept plan that is under the current request being sought by the applicant pursuant to the settlement agreement. The lake has been expanded by approximately, as I said, 299 acres, but the preservation areas and the operations areas are the same as that which has already been approved. This is a little bit of a different perspective, and it's easier to kind of see what the additional lake area is from this. The blue area is the additional lake area. The gray area is the areas that have already been approved. The green areas are those areas which are currently under conservation easement and will be maintained as they currently exist. The proposed reclamation plan ultimately takes 3 lakes, or creates the 3 lakes that you see before you there, and provides for side slopes and shoreline plantings, as well as shoreline stabilization, again maintaining the preservation areas, which are once again shown in the dotted hatch. The lakes are the little wavy lines on there. The operative future land use policy for the Lee County Plan designation on the subject property is 1.4.5. As noted and highlighted there, natural resource extraction and related facilities are recognized as permitted land uses. Additionally, the original request was found to be consistent with a number of other policies that are found in the Lee Plan by both the staff and the Lee County Hearing Examiner, as well as the Board of County Commissioners. The request was found to meet or exceed all the applicable requirements of the county's land development code, and the conditions were deemed sufficient to minimize any negative impacts that the operations at the mine might create. The approval granted by Z-02-47 included specific findings that the request met all of the Lee Plan goals, objectives, and policies, along with all the land development code performance standards. And further, the request was specifically deemed compatible, and the conditions in the areas approximate to the mine have not changed significantly from that time. There was determined at that point to be no increased traffic that would result from prior approvals, and that all the preservation areas were identified and set aside in conservation easements. Conditions were deemed sufficient to protect the public interests. In conclusion, it's my professional opinion that the applicant has made a proper application for the amendment to the approved development plans, has met all of the applicable standards, is consistent with the 2003 Lee Plan, the 2003 Land Development Code, and generally accepted planning principles. We've provided the necessary record that entitles consideration for an approval at this point and for an amendment to the previously approved industrial plan development. That was quicker than yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you. Counsel?
Question?
Yes, Fred.
Just to, out of curiosity, those monitoring wells and the testing, who gets those test reports?
They go to Department of Natural Resources at Lee County. The DNR folks at Lee County, I believe, supply them also to the city, and I know they also go to the Florida DEP.
Okay, last question. When they do the restoration, what's the slope of the banks supposed to be?
I believe the slopes are 6-to-1 on those lake slopes now, when they do the restoration, down to a depth that I want to say it's 6 feet below wet season water table.
Okay.
And I just want to point out, Councilman Forbes, the IPD that is before you now is, as you saw from the master concept plan, does not include some of the things that was discussed in the settlement, including the parkland.
Right.
Those slopes and things will be adjusted when the residential
Correct.
comp plan moves forward.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thanks. Counsel?
I have some questions.
Amy? Yeah.
I-
Laura on deck.
As a point of information, I get the reports monthly from, it's forwarded to the city, and I get a copy of, but so you could get a copy too, because Citrus Park is in my district, and I get calls every month about the blasting. So my one question about this is, as we're expanding the lakes or the ability to mine areas, is there any engineering understanding of what, if the blasting nuisance of noise and vibration would increase or decrease, because you are moving closer to Citrus Park, which is where the residentials are?
It should stay about the same. We have our blasting expert here, and he may be able to address that in more detail, but, and tell me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but it should stay about the same, should be approximately the same.
And would the frequency of the blasting change because you're increasing the acreage?
No, ma'am. Because we can only extract at such a rate with the equipment that's out there, so it's going to be
Okay, so you have a
approximately the same.
limitation on your ability to do that. And finally, what kind of enforcement can you have so that the trucks only go on Bonita Grand rather than East Terry Street, besides training?
We had a long discussion about this yesterday, and, I mean, the problem is that the mine itself isn't an enforcement agency. The city, and I guess you'd have to work with the county on this, I'm not exactly sure, but you can declare East Terry a no-truck roadway. You can actually declare, there's a process, a statutory process to go through that. So you could do that as a city. As a company, the best we can do is try and advise the drivers not to do that. If we catch them repeatedly violating that, we can tell them, don't come back and not do business here. But we can't actually physically go out there and stop them because we're just a private company. We haven't got any kind of enforcement mechanisms other than just if they repeatedly violate that and we find out that they're violating it, then we can tell them, you know, you don't get to come back here and pick up any rock. But they're not employees of the mine. These are all independent contractors that have their own trucks, and they haul this stuff to the various construction sites or wherever they're going with it. So we have a program. We do that on a regular basis to advise the drivers not to use East Terry, to only use Bonita Grand. We have signs out there about speeding and not using East Terry, but using Bonita Grand. And like I said, that's about as much as we can do.
And just one more question, which may not be appropriate for this hearing here, but we are interested, obviously, the city's interested in executing the rest of the agreement that we came to. And with the extension on the dates of operation of the mine, is there any protection so that we can move in a timely fashion to getting the applications and going forward? I don't know what the plans are. I mean, are we going to exhaust the mine first before we go forward, or what?
Well, I can tell you that the client has directed us to start preparing all of those plans and getting them ready for submittal to the city and moving forward with that. So and that means they're spending money, and honestly,
Because
I'm not particularly cheap, so they're spending significant amounts of money, so.
But you don't stop dump trucks.
why don't you expedite it and charge a little less money,
And stop the dump trucks.
Well, the dump trucks, you know, we're keeping them as best as we can. We're trying to keep them on Bonita Grand and not on East Terry.
But if in your training classes you say, you know, all we can do is tell you not to do it and there's no consequence, what if we had a sheriff's officer sit there, and if they're on that road, they're heading to Terry, they get a warning,
Happy to.
and 3 warnings, you folks you say you are not to come back, period. Okay.
If they're habitual violators, we tell them, and we find out about it, we tell them, don't come back.
Are you, Amy?
But how does that, and I'm sorry to dig down or drill down a little bit, and I know you're not the traffic cop, so to speak, but how does that work, or how has that been working? What can we do to improve that?
Well, what we were told by the staff yesterday is that in the last at least couple years, they haven't received any complaints. But what they testified to yesterday was that there's an educational program for the drivers, and there's signage. I mean, to the extent that we can put everybody on notice, and we're required to under the existing conditions, we comply with those conditions.
So am I to assume no trucks have gone down Terry Street?
I
No.
wouldn't go that far. However, what I'll say is that
So there's my point.
not all trucks would be generating a trip from the mine. I will say that the current mine operators have been relatively good neighbors with the city. They have provided information on the back of all of their tickets for the truck drivers that they're not supposed to use Terry Street. In the past, we have worked with the sheriff's department to put sheriff's deputies at the intersection of Terry and Bonita Grand and have persuaded drivers not to take that route. To the greatest extent possible, we've enforced this. This is a zoning condition. This is not a DOT condition. This is not a maintenance of traffic type of condition. So there are limitations to how we can enforce this. However, with what we have and how we've been able to work this arrangement, recent history has shown there's been a pretty good period of compliance. I'm not going to say perfect, but it's still been pretty good. When we hear complaints, we do call the operators, and they have addressed those issues, and I have not heard numerous complaints in many years.
I was going to say Laura's on deck, and then Fred, you're on double deck, unless it's about the trucks.
No, it is.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, all I was going to say is, at some point, when they go to the other site, there's no way you can not have to be on Terry Street to go to any place. Both going there and coming back.
I'm sorry, I'm not following.
Go ahead, Fred.
The other parcel that was part of the settlement,
That's going to be under a different approval with different
that's right,
conditions.
but it's still going to have the same, there is no way you can get out,
Just-
get there and get back without going.
As a general point of reference, so the council is informed, we have specifically addressed truck routes for extraction or the relocation of fill or material from one location in the city to another. And we have worked with the applicants in terms of staying on certain roads and staying off certain roads. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but it has been rather successful.
There's no way you can get from that site
Correct, there are no other options.
without being on Terry Street.
But if you're limiting those trips, that'll be something that we're able to evaluate and know what we're getting into at the time of approval. Right now, we're still just talking hypothetically, so.
Okay, thank you. Laura?
Amy raised the concern about blasting. There's also the other concern of the release of the carcinogens. Are they doing the water trucks as they're required to do on a regular basis?
There's a requirement for the water truck to run twice a day. I've been to the site, I have not seen the water truck, but I was not on the site, and the applicant might be able to address that.
Well, I obviously don't go down there every day. I am told by the mine operator that they water it at least twice a day and sometimes more than that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mike?
Good.
You good, Fred?
We should find out what
Well,
the
zoning.
zoning board.
Yeah. We should hear from the
What's their
zoning.
The zoning board voted 6-1 in favor.
Did they have any conditions or anything?
They followed the staff conditions. There was no deviations from that.
Was there any particular discussion we should be aware of?
It was 3
Actually,
hours long.
Laura was there.
yeah, Councilwoman Carr was there. It was mostly traffic, some blasting questions, same line of questions that the council's had.
Laura, I was going to say, anything to add because you were there? No, but yeah, no.
I undertook an educational experience for the zoning board because they had a lot of questions about mining per se, and I probably rambled on way too long. But
That's
a
all
couple of
right.
them came up afterwards and said they thought it was very interesting, so.
Did you get your point across?
Well, I think I answered the questions. I don't know about the point.
Then it was time well spent, right? But, and I don't want to belabor this, but I do want to, about this traffic.
Well, as John indicated, I mean, this is a zoning approval.
I understood,
So there-
understood.
So there are two choices. If we choose to use traffic enforcement and limit traffic along Terry, then that would be a city decision solely on us, enforced through the sheriff.
And on us to enforce it.
Well, we would have to work with the sheriff.
Understood, but that would be on us, right?
Yes. The second issue is if there's evidence, and there was nothing brought at zoning board, and I haven't seen any complaints about traffic along Terry, but if there was violations and we tied it to the mine, then they would be in violation. The city would have to use its code enforcement procedures against the mine, which then, of course, they have the relationship with the truckers, who are independent contractors, so they would, as Dr. Depew pointed out, limit certain truckers, do other things to try and address those remedies. But, from my perspective, the issue is It was an issue apparently at least in 2002, 2003, when under different operators this was a major issue. I'm unaware of any current issues but the conditions are the same, and so if it becomes an issue, we have mechanisms to deal with it.
Has code enforcement even been involved or taken a peek? As to
I've heard nothing.
Complaint basis.
Yeah, once a complaint's made and the truck's gone, then it's like, oof.
What I think happened was when Terry Street was widened, we saw a large number of complaints, because now the trucks that may have gone unnoticed before were now much closer to people's backyards. And in fact, I believe a council member was elected because of that issue. However, since that time, like I said, we've worked with the mine operators, plural, to deal with how they're handling the routes for those trucks, and they have been very helpful in making sure that, I would say about 99.9% of those trucks go down Bonita Grand. I've been out there several times. I've not personally seen any trucks turn onto Terry Street. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen, but I've never personally witnessed it.
How about some kind of monitoring, some kind of a video?
We could do that. What we've done so far is it's been relatively reactive as opposed to proactive on it. We have sent people out there, whether it be code enforcement, whether it be the sheriff's department, when there's been complaints, and they've really made a presence in that area to make sure that there was a point made. If we're looking for some sort of a video, I'm sure we could deal with. I know several of the firms that had dealt with the city doing traffic monitoring in the past have video recording options. We could maybe look at that option and bring it back to you if that's something you want to consider. We'd be happy.
I'd like to look at that option,
Yes, sir.
and I don't want that onus to be on us.
Understood.
Okay.
Well, and in that case, I would probably start looking at that as one of the new conditions you would add to this zoning approval, because if it was not included, then it would not be part of their approval. So,
But now's not the time.
no, now would be the time.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
now is the time.
Yes, sir. If it's not included now, then it won't be included.
I'd like to make that a condition. I don't know if I have any council support on that, but,
Yes.
okay. And let's talk through that half a second. There's been a motion and a second for a video camera device. Help me out. I'm not sure how it works, but something that can monitor this.
You would there's video recording that can be done right now. The equipment is cheap enough. It's not necessarily that expensive to set up. It's more expensive to monitor than it is to record.
I think if you're going to do it, you want to have video that catches the truck license plate at speed, because sometimes they're going to have to go that way, but the speed is also an issue.
If this is a situation that we're just looking to monitor the intersection and watch where the trucks are going, I think that we can work with the applicant to come with a pretty cost-effective solution. If we start looking at additional data points in terms of speed or other information, I think that those costs start to increase. So we really need to start making sure the information we'd be getting would be consistent with the use we would have for that information.
What is the speed, 35 down through there? 45?
I think it's 35, yes.
35, 45? I'm not opposed to the speed, Fred, but
Well,
I'm concerned about that because I know people who engage in criminal defense, that you have to be qualified to operate equipment that properly determines speed. I don't do that, but I know it's not as simple as it seems, and so I don't know that I don't know that we have anyone that has that expertise. I understand at monitoring it to see where the trucks go, but when you start getting to measuring speed from a video camera, I don't know that we have
Well,
qualified
And we
people.
also, well, the point of
I
this
think-
is that we have a condition that the trucks do not go on East Terry Street, and that is what we should try to monitor.
yeah, monitoring.
So and that is just take their picture, and if they're on if the device is on East Terry Street, they don't belong there, you know.
and what I think if we were looking to prosecute for speeding,
We don't.
We'd be in trouble. but
We don't
if-
do that.
Yeah, we're not. That's not what we're looking to do here.
Fred, you want to make a new division of city
We can
council
do
to
it on
enforce
Imperial,
speeding?
we can't do it here.
So I think that if it's your
Something that'll capture the license plate, the truck, the serial numbers, whatever it is.
What I'd simply state is maybe we look for enough monitoring so that we can record to see if someone is making a turn, and if they are making a turn onto Terry, to figure out to the greatest extent possible identification of that particular truck.
But that's critical, right? So.
Well, without knowing that, then why are you doing the exercise?
Absolutely, that's what I'm saying. That's critical, not a red truck went down,
Yes,
that's
sir.
not going to work.
So the condition should simply be that the applicant will work with the city to set up monitoring for vehicles, and it can be including but not limited to vehicle monitoring. And all we would require is that there is at the intersection where Terry is, a video camera that picks up trucks, and then probably a video camera at the mine to show that that truck came from the mine. And that would,
Yeah, you probably want at least one showing north on Bonita Grand and one pointed west on Terry, so you can see if it came from the mine and then if it went, what the license plate was.
Okay, good.
Right, so there's been a motion and a second, and we're going to vote, yes, Derek?
well, there's no need to vote on.
No need to vote on that condition right yet?
You haven't heard from staff.
Yeah, let's hear
You
from
haven't had,
Okay.
you guys are always.
No, but I
hammering
don't
on me
need
on
to
the
hear from you
process.
on this video monitoring. I know how I feel, but fair enough.
And they've got some additional clarifications to make, and then the public hearing.
Tell us how you feel about this video monitoring, Derek. Kick us off.
No,
No, I'm kidding. All right, who's
we're
next?
silly now.
Who's
Okay,
next?
we would call Jeff Straw.
Mr. Mayor, member of the commission, good afternoon, I guess, at this point. I'm Jeffrey Straw, I'm Vice President, Area Manager of Geosonics. We are the independent seismologist that measures the blasting at the Bonita Grand Mine.
Let me ask you a question, just for their benefit. How long have you been dealing with mines and mine permitting and measuring vibration and sound?
I'm in my 42nd year in this industry with the same firm, which is absolutely unique in these days. My background is 2 years in our corporate office in Pennsylvania. The last remaining years have been here in South Florida. Been dealing with the Bonita Grand Mine through all of the owners, and have been dealing with blasting and vibration monitoring, the evaluation, testimony before councils in the areas of blasting, vibration, noise, structure effects on perception, since 1978, through the present. We continue to do that. I've been accepted in most of the counties that have blasting as an expert in all of those areas.
Who regulates blasting?
The state fire marshal, since 2000, has sole and exclusive control over the evaluation of blasting for commercial mining operations. Construction materials mining activity is what it's referred to by the state fire marshal.
Are there limitations on the days when blasting can occur?
There are. The commercial mining can only do blasting Monday through Friday, hours of 8 a.m. through 5 o'clock p.m. No legal holidays as defined by the state, so that means also no Saturdays and Sundays.
Are there limitations on the amount of vibration that could be caused by a blast at a mining site?
Yes, the state fire marshal has a set of limits that's established within Florida statute, chapter 55230, that we go by. The reports, Commissioner, that you get refer to that in those reports. Those come from our office directly. They go to the mine at the same time they come to the city. And we look at that on a regular basis. We also get the instruments download automatically, so we have 3 instruments in the adjacent community. When they trigger at a blast, we get that information in our office. We look at it. We send information to the mining company for their evaluation, and then we prepare those monthly reports that you see. So someone's looking at it every time there is a blast.
And is that to ensure that there's compliance with the vibration standards of the state?
It's to ensure compliance, one, but then also the mine actually uses that as we look at it to determine whether they need to make adjustments in the use of explosives at the mine.
How long does a blast last, typically?
Well, the blast itself is detonated in less than a second. The individual blast, the vibration that goes outwards, maybe about 3.5 seconds is what we typically see in a seismograph record.
How often at this mine, on average, is there a blast?
It varies. Understanding that this is a market-driven operation. In other words, when there's a project that needs the aggregate that's produced, the operation ships more than when it's a slow period. Right now, during this time of the year, most of the blasting ramps down, some of the jobs ramp down, but we typically find there's 4 to maybe 7 blasts at this mine a month at most. That's the worst case.
By virtue of the time extension, do you envision that the amount of blast per month would change?
I don't. The issue is related, as Dr. Depew stated, it's related to the equipment at the mine. They could drill and blast a whole bunch, but then they would have to wait and dig it. And that dragline can only dig so much per day, and they can only move so much per day. So there's a certain amount of mining that goes on each day. That's not going to change based on the equipment that's there. So because this is a rather costly process, it becomes an issue for them in terms of blasting as they need to stay ahead of the excavation.
Are there repercussions for a blasting contractor if they violate the state fire marshal standards?
Yes, there's a fine, potential revocation of their license, potential revocation of the state-issued permit for all of that.
Because of that, are most all blasting contractors inclined to follow those rules?
Yes. And you have 2 entities. You have the blasting contractor that actually does the loading and detonation of the explosives, but you also have the mine operator that's paying attention.
Given the number of blasts you've identified per month, if you extrapolate that out to a year and the amount of time you feel that vibration, what's the full extent of how much you would feel vibration in a year's time?
I did some really worst-case numbers yesterday, and it's somewhere between about 3 to 5 minutes total worth of perception broken up into those 3.5-second segments over a year.
I don't have any other questions.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you. Fred?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
Are you saying that during the, let's say in the last 10 years, you've been there all that time,
That's correct.
none of those blasts exceeded the limits?
They have not. As a matter of fact, I looked at the data that I looked at for 2016 through probably October when we got prepared for these hearings, and they had been maybe 60% at the most in those, and those go back to like 2016.
I think that's the most significant thing you said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amy, did you have something? I'm
No,
sorry.
I mean,
Okay.
it just reinforces what I observed with the reports that I've been getting for 3 years now. So I only have 3 years' worth of data, that I've never observed it exceeding the requirements that the state did it, in the reports that I've been reading. So that's good. I guess my only other question is, you said that further blasting or extraction would be dependent on the demand for the product, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so it wouldn't have anything to do with any development plans that would be coming out of the owner?
No, not that I'm aware of. That would actually inhibit mining operations. We have projects where they have turned into, over the years, developments, and what has, Pembroke Pines and Miramar are 2 of the cities that we've worked through all of that. The city of Weston. And as they mined and excavated areas and started to move houses in, they weren't going to blast next to them. So that would curtail the mining. And when you get to the final sloping of the lakes, you can't dig with a big drag line there to dig because it only has a certain amount of reach.
So a limiting factor could be the timing of any plans for development in the future.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We don't have any other witnesses at this time. Should there be questions from the public, we'd welcome the opportunity to respond to those questions.
Sure. Members of the public that would like to speak at this time? Yes, Derek.
I think what Ms. Montgomery is asking for is the ability to come up and answer after the public comment.
Right.
But we also haven't had the staff presentation yet, so I don't want you to have to open up the public twice. Maybe the staff presentation may resolve some of those questions.
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council. For the record, Jacqueline Genson with Community Development for the staff presentation. I will go ahead and try not to be repetitive in nature, but if you do have any questions, please stop and ask me. This is the staff review team that has participated in the review of this application. I do have John Dolmer here with us today. He's already testified. We also have Mike Kirby, who, while he did retire from our department, he still remained on staff for this project review, and the benefit of that is that Mike Kirby has been involved with the compliance of the mine since 2009 and moving forward, so he's a lot of historical knowledge on the mine. We also have Mr. Theriak here. He was staff's counsel on this petition as well. We already went over the request. In terms of the overview, Mr. Depew also went over this in detail. It's just the history of the entitlements for the mine, which we also added in condition 1 as still being in full force and effect, except as modified herein by this amendment. Based on the history, we all know this property was annexed in 2003, and because we did not bring it into a city classification, we are reviewing it under the Lee County Lee Plan and LDC at time of annexation, which is approximately June of 2003. So all that, this request was reviewed in that capacity. The applicant has requested that this application be deemed sufficient pursuant to Florida statutes, but also based on the settlement agreement that was approved last month by City Council. The zoning board summary, which was yesterday, originally the hearing was scheduled for October, but again, because of the volume of the data and analysis that was required and the review based on the Lee Plan and Lee County LDC, they did ask for additional time, so it was continued to the hearing which took place yesterday. The topics of discussion are listed as you see before you. There was a lot of discussion by the legal counsel for both the applicant and the city in staff's capacity and as the board's capacity on the process and procedure that was taking place. A lot of discussion on the mining expiration, which dealt with the current mining expiration of 2035 to the request of 2041, and then some questions on whether or not the applicant would go ahead and utilize the governor's executive order power to keep extending the mine. And as it was discussed yesterday, the applicant has waived that ability through the settlement agreement, and you can ask the legal team about that more if you have questions. Questions on the monitoring wells came up, truck traffic, which we already discussed in detail. Processing operations, there was questions of the dust, any particulates, watering trucks. Neighborhood impacts also came up. Mr. Inserpi, who was one of the board members yesterday, used to live out in Citrus Park, so he had some knowledge back from 2011 of when he was there. So he was curious about the outreach to Citrus Park. And Councilman Crumbright did explain to them that you actually were in contact as much as last week on the board, with that board. And then we also explained that one of the members, or one of the residents from Citrus Park actually attended the neighborhood meeting last week as well. But there was questions about outreach to the Citrus Park neighborhood. There's questions on dewatering, which the applicant said based on the stage of the mine, they didn't anticipate dewatering based on the phase limits of the mine as it exists. There was questions on reclamation and the timing of the reclamation and the bonding requirements that are set forth by the codes. And then there was an additional letter that was submitted to the chairman of the zoning board, which I do have a copy and I can provide you if you'd like, regarding a concern of the amendment request. But in summary, those are the topics that we discussed. And again, based on the time, we apologize that we did not have minutes available, but those are the topics that came up. This is just an excerpt from the staff report. All this information that I'm going to go over from here on out is included in your staff report in some form or fashion. This is just the land use entitlements, the comprehensive plan designations, if you will, for the subject properties and the properties immediately adjacent to them in north, south, east, and west. So all that information is included in the staff report, and I'd be happy to answer questions if you have any. The master concept plan, Mr. Depew went over those in his presentation. The master concept plan is a 6-page master concept plan, and I have identified the title of each sheet so you can see that, but it is a 6-page master concept plan. In terms of the schedule of uses and development regulations and deviations, they are asking for no new uses. They're not modifying any of the setbacks or buffering requirements. As part of this request, they are not changing any of the deviations either. Staff is requesting the addition of a condition for a northern buffer because of a change in use based on the county preserve lands to the north, which they've agreed to. For Lee County consistency with the comprehensive plan and the land development code, based on the historical analysis of the prior requests, staff agreed with the prior county analysis and the applicant's analysis that was submitted as part of this report as meeting the Lee Plan and Lee County Land Development Code. In terms of when the 2002 amendment was approved, and based on the annexation, it was just a few months in between, and there were not many changes to the Lee Plan and the LDC at that time that would affect the petition as proposed today. And the applicant had a pretty thorough analysis. They had a design narrative, a decision-making narrative, and also a Lee Plan and Lee County LDC analysis included in their data and analysis. In terms of neighborhood compatibility, not much has changed again in the direct adjacent land uses that surround the mine, with the exception of the acquisition of the property to the north, which is by Lee County. And in discussions with Lee County 2020, they are actively programming passive park uses for that area. So that is staff's reasoning for requiring a buffer to the north if the mining operation continues and expands. And again, the new environmental consideration is the buffer. We already touched on that. In terms of existing conditions that staff analyzed, and this is also summarized in your staff report, Mr. Kirby analyzed the perimeter buffers and the berms. He touched on the wellfield monitoring and other items like that. For stormwater management, the system is designed for the 25 3-year storm event, and then there's other elements that are included. And then for transportation, again, the impacts were not anticipated to increase. It's just a mining period has expanded. They don't anticipate any more impacts to the railway network. And again, it was evaluated by Lee County DOT, our staff, and Public Works. And this is an excerpt from your staff report as well. It's attachment A. These are the findings that the zoning board evaluated the request on, staff also evaluated the request on, and these findings are how you provide your recommendation and final agency action on this plan development amendment request. So this is included in attachment A of your staff report. And I apologize for the level of detail on this slide and the next slide, but we are just summarizing, again, those review criteria. And the conditions, this is on page 4 and 5 of your staff report. Again, condition 1 is tying in the previous zoning entitlements. Condition 2 is your master concept plan. Condition 3 deals with environmental conditions, tying the reclamation, a prohibition of open burning, the restoration of creative open space areas, and the addition of the northern buffer. Condition 4 strengthens the condition for the truck use on Terry Street. Condition 5 repeals the County Road 951 alignment condition based on a previous council direction to staff a few years ago. Condition 6 are some engineering conditions regarding other permits that we would like to see at time of local development order. And condition 7 is what we refer to as a common condition in our plan developments regarding concurrency matters for traffic. And with that, staff is here for any questions.
Amy?
I just have a question about, because I don't really understand how the final date got to be where it was. So is it my understanding that the original permit was out of the state or something? How did that original date, the 41 come?
The 2041, that is with the applicant's FDEP permit.
Excuse me?
The applicant's FDEP permit.
They already have a permit? All right,
It is-
and it's been existing since the beginning of the mine?
I will let them,
I don't understand, if someone would just run me through, I know we had emergency extensions, but I thought that the final date was more contemporary than that.
so for the mine, I mean, you do have your local permits for mining termination, And then there are other state requirements, or other state permits that they are required to obtain. At the local level, they have obtained emergency order extensions up to 2035, but they do have other state agency permits that are beyond that date.
Okay, so it's the local permits that had been a lot shorter, and then it was extended 5 or 6 times up till 35 or something. Is that my
Several times by several emergency orders.
emergency orders? And that's how we got to 35, and then they're just asking to extend the local permit to comply with what they had with the state permit. That's how we got to 41? Okay, thank you.
And they're not going to ask for any further extensions if emergencies come up?
Beyond the 41 date, correct. I
And
mean,
that's in
how the
the-
condition is written is we would have to come back for public hearing to extend that date beyond the 41.
That's as we stand today. But if the settlement agreement is fully implemented, one of the conditions of the settlement agreement was the applicant agreed to waive any ability to go beyond 2041. Because the settlement agreement is not fully in effect, because you've got all these subsequent approvals, the current one says they still have the right to apply for an extension.
I thought that's what we had in this, it's not in this,
The right for an extension is in the IPD amendment. Until we get the settlement agreement fully implemented, then we have the condition that the applicant waive the ability to seek any extensions beyond 2041. And DEP also had a shorter time frame, but the DEP time frame was also extended by the governor's executive orders, and that's how it got to 2041. We're at 2035, so they're asking just to match up 6 additional years to match up with the DEP permit to 2041.
But hopefully they'll start building before then.
I think that is the hope.
Well, and just to be clear, the proposal, which is not before you today, to bring in the residential plan development has a much smaller footprint of the mine. So they're not going to be digging, this is if
That's the point.
that doesn't happen.
you
so,
know,
yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't want them to execute the plan that they put in here, so it really is dependent on them following through with their applications.
And the city
So
approving.
I guess we have to have good faith in each other, right? Is that what we're asking for?
And the comp plan amendment has been filed, so.
Excuse me?
The comprehensive plan amendment has been filed, so staff is reviewing that as we speak to transition it into the residential
I've
portion
got
of
a
the
question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Amy, I'm sorry.
No, you said that the first step in following through on the agreement has already been filed, is what
In
you're saying?
terms of the conversion to the residential.
The
so-
residential, and that's already been filed. So we've taken step 1 already. Okay, thank you.
Derek, if this passes, then what? If this fails, then what?
If this passes, we move forward and towards the comp plan amendment, and then eventually the acquisition of the 2 parcels that the city would be getting, and the reduction in units to 700 units. If it fails, we go back to court.
Okay,
What a great way to make a decision.
I'm not thinking about that part.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job. So move, do we have to have public hearing, public comment on this?
Up to Derek.
We do,
It's his show.
whether you want to do it after you make the motion or
Make the
before.
motion to move as presented with the conditions by staff.
Second.
Okay, there's been a motion and a second. Good time for public comment, Derek?
Yes, please.
Okay. Any members of the public that would like to speak, please come forward. Seeing none, been a motion to approve in a second. Is there further discussion, council? Roll call, please.
Councilwoman Caramba,
Aye?
Councilwoman Carr,
Aye.
Mayor Simmons.
No.
Councilman Gibson,
Aye.
Councilman Forbes.
Thank you. Next item is unless you want to take a break.
We're good.
Zoning ordinance, this is a second reading and public hearing on zoning ordinance of the City of Bonita Springs, Florida, approving application PD 19-61859-BOS, amending the existing Tassone mixed-use plan development zoning ordinance ZO-03-16 to allow the schedule of uses, to allow the schedule of uses and update the master concept plan for plus or minus 1.3 acres located on Old US 41 south of River Road, River Rock Boulevard, strap number 26-47-25-B4-00010.0010, providing for an effective date.
Excellent reading.
Okay, very good.
Okay,
Hello.
at this time, I just want to, is anyone planning on testifying here who has not been previously sworn in? Okay. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? All right, you're good.
And you know, now that we've done that, we do have that video monitoring in there?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
That's not going to be a problem.
Yeah, minus the speed, okay, sorry about that. Hello, welcome.
Here it is. Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Spector with Retzel and Andrus on behalf of the applicant. I'm just going to give you a few introductions before I pass it off to our staff, or to our team. I will let you know that each of them does have their resume here, but they have all been accepted as experts. If you have any questions regarding their expertise, they can provide you with additional information. This is the project team. We have Chris Salemi with Aileron, who is actually the applicant on this request. We have Alexis Crespo and Lindsay Robin, who are the planners with Waldrop Engineering, and we have James Inc., who is the engineer on the project. So we wanted to give you an overview so you had an idea of the specific property that we're talking about. We are here today to ask for an amendment to the Tassone MPD. The Tassone MPD itself is rather large. The property that we're asking for a amendment on is rather small in comparison. It is outlined in red on this aerial. This is a close-up of the property. As it exists today, what's labeled Parcel O and future development is one parcel. We are before you today with a request solely for Parcel O. If the request is approved, we will be doing a lot split to split the current lot into two. And again, the request today is only with regard to Parcel O, and as will be explained later, we are actually creating that parcel with its own set of site development regulations. As mentioned, we are before you today for an amendment to the Tassone MPD. Our request is to add the use auto parts store to the list of uses, and we are also correcting a historic mapping error. As the team will explain in greater detail, we have actually created a list for Parcel O itself with just the specific uses that would apply to Parcel O, and we'll explain that. We have a slide later that shows you what uses those would be. All right, so I am going to pass it off to Lindsay Robin with Waldrop Engineering.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Okay, there we go. Lindsay Robin here for the record with Waldrop Engineering. So Sarah described the parcel pretty well, and I'm not going to belabor anything that you guys have already heard. This is the parcel location. It's 1.3 acres in size. It does get legal access from Old 41 Road and River Rock Boulevard. Site's cleared, it's partially vegetated, and it is located in the commercial tract of the Tassone mixed-use plan development. The Tassone MPD was approved in 2003. It's approximately 513 acres in size, and today it is permitted for the development of 1,400 dwelling units and 90,000 square feet of commercial uses. Our future land use map showing the entire property within the general commercial future land use category, which the proposed use is consistent with the overall intent of this category. Our current zoning map is shown here with the subject property highlighted by the square. And as you can see, it's currently in the C1 and the MPD zoning districts. Our proposed zoning map here, we're showing the entire project within the MPD boundary, the zoning district, the MPD zoning district. So as part of this amendment, we are correcting what staff has classified as a historic mapping error. The entire parcel was always intended to be in the MPD. The legal description was incorrect. We went ahead and fixed that error and essentially fixed the parcel and brought it into the MPD. I have some surrounding land uses here. It's mostly surrounded by existing roadway and, roadway and existing development. So to our north, we have the Dollar General commercial tract. A little further north, you've got your restaurants and all those other specialty retail stores in there. To our northwest, we have, to our northeast, we have the multifamily and single-family residential in the Hawthorne community. We've got single-family residential as well to our southeast, and directly south is future commercial. And then, of course, across the Old 41 right-of-way is more vacant commercial lands. Okay. This is the overall test zone MCP here. And in the bottom lower right corner, I've got a red circle there. You'll see the subject property. Here, I'm just going to walk you through very quickly what our proposed site-specific master concept plan is for Parcel O. It's an auto parts store with surface parking, of course. To our north, we have a 15-foot Type B buffer adjacent to the Hawthorne community. We have a 25-foot drainage easement, which does not overlap with the landscape buffer. We have a 5-foot Type A buffer adjacent to the Dollar General, a 15-foot wide Type D buffer along your Old 41 right-of-way. We have no buffer adjacent to the future development tract. That was a request from your Public Works Department. They want to do a 25-foot wide easement there so they can go ahead and access the Rosemary Canal, maintain it, get heavy equipment through there. A buffer would just be in the way. So they asked us to do that, and we were happy to do that. You'll also note that we have 2 points of access. We've got one directly off Old 41 Road, which would be the main point of access. And then you also have your cross access through the Dollar General provided from River Rock Boulevard. I do want to also mention that both of these access points are approved on the master concept plan today. We're not creating those, they're approved. Just to dig in a little bit, there was some confusion at the first reading, so I just wanted to reiterate some of those points I didn't really get a chance to make. So Parcel O is new to the schedule of uses. What that means is that Parcel O will have underlined uses because technically if you are adding, you underline. Auto parts store is being added to Parcel O only. We are limiting the schedule of uses to ensure long-term compatibility with the surrounding land uses and to allow greater flexibility in the case of redevelopment, which is essentially going to happen one day. And also, the site is currently designated within the commercial schedule of uses, so we're limiting that. By limiting it, I mean we're removing these uses that are currently allowed, and we're saying Parcel O will not have these uses. And those uses include all the uses you see here. We have animal clinics, clubs, department stores, a drive-through. We're taking that use out. We're taking out drugstore, package store, personal services, group 4, which is your bail bonding, your tattoo parlors, your massage stuff, pet services, pet shops, pharmacy, repair shops, all the restaurants, storage, used merchandise stores. So we're trying to create a more a schedule of uses that is less impactful to the neighbors and more palatable than what's currently allowed today. So this is just a quick overview of the O'Reilly Auto Parts store. Just like any other retail store, it will function like a retail store. There will be a lot of sales of typical auto accessories. They sell all kinds of stuff, just like you would walk into a Target and go to the card line section. There's all kinds of accessories and fun stuff you can buy. There's no on-site installation. There are no service bays. The only activities permitted, which are strictly limited in Condition 2, is the ability to replace the windshield wipers, light bulbs, and car batteries, okay? So that's all we're allowing them to do there. And then also the applicant is committing to an earth tone color scheme to comply with the Bonita Land Development Code, which doesn't allow the use of primary colors. So this elevation shows a more neutral tone that the applicant has agreed to commit to. And as you've probably seen, maybe if you've driven around Lee County or Collier County, O'Reilly's is a bright red and green, and they're like, no, we want to look good in Bonita, we're going to do this nice color scheme. Deviations, we're seeking one deviation. This is the one I had mentioned earlier. It's just to allow no landscape buffer in that area there because simply the request by Public Works to provide the 25 feet for the Rosemary Canal maintenance activities. And staff did recommend approval of that deviation. They're very much in support of it. We held our 2 required neighborhood meetings. We noticed over 800 people. There was really no concern mentioned by, I think there was maybe at most 4 people who showed up to one meeting. No concern about the auto parts store use, which is the subject of this request. And now I'm going to turn it over to Alexis Crespo. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Alexis Crespo with Waldrop Engineering. I'm going to just touch on the uses compatibility with the surrounding land uses and really get to the crux of the matter, which is in 2003, when this MPD was approved, the council eliminated auto-oriented uses, including auto parts store. So we want to really focus on what has changed in your code in the area since 2003, and why is this auto parts store use appropriate today in relation to what has changed. So we're going to focus on changes to your land development code since 2003. You guys have really upgraded your standards. Waldrop Engineering has been pleased to be a part of upgrading your commercial design standards, buffer codes, supplementary regulations for auto-oriented uses. So that has changed significantly to make sure these uses look nice. The other key component is Tucson has built out in terms of the residential component in Hawthorne. So we know where the residential uses have fallen on the property. We understand the layout of the streets, the buffers, their walls, and items that allow them to be well buffered from this proposed use. The nature of the auto parts store has also evolved since 2003. You think of the Napa Auto Parts of the 90s, and what you see now is a much more retail-focused storefront, and it doesn't have the service bays and some of the heavier, more intensive uses you saw in previous stores. And then the biggest thing that we're offering that was unable to be offered in 2003 is this site-specific master concept plan that Lindsay walked you through. So we're showing you where the building will be, where the dumpsters will be, where the buffers will be, so that there's surety this will look like a retail store and not be an intensive auto-oriented use, which is really what I believe council wanted to eliminate back in the day. And I said this at zoning board, that if we were here asking for the more intensive car wash, gas station, that would be a completely different story than limiting it to just the auto parts retail store. So we believe we're touching on all your code's aspects when it comes to compatibility. We look at the type and the scale of the use. Is it emitting noise, light, visual impact, traffic impact to our neighbors? And we submit that the request will not do any of these things. Here's an example of an auto parts O'Reilly specifically with that muted color palette that we're looking to achieve. Again, this is low intensity retail. It is located on an arterial roadway. It is well served by public infrastructure. It's within your general commercial future land use category. And it provides good transition from the heavier industrial on the north end of Old 41. And certainly as you get down to your downtown, you want it to transition away from industrial. You don't want heavy uses to the gateway to your downtown. And we would submit that the appearance of this auto parts store will provide that retail commercial transition. Chris is here. He's operates and owns properties leased to O'Reilly's in numerous markets. This store has evolved over the last 16 years. It's no longer associated with any on-site repair. It's got conventional retail presentation, retail hours of operation, no outdoor sales or storage. In terms of noise, the big thing here is we're not going to have any kind of service bays. You do have a noise ordinance in place that prohibits the emitting of noise outside of normal hours to your adjacent residential uses. We are proposing the 15-foot wide Type B buffer, and Hawthorne has a masonry wall in their buffer to further screen them from this use. And you can see the distances between any of the surface parking areas to the nearest homes, and there again are intervening walls, buffer, landscaping to provide screening between those uses. And as Lindsay noted, the concern from the few people that did show up from our neighborhood was we don't want restaurants. The garbages overflow, they're open late, there's alcohol consumption, so having more retail-oriented uses was a positive thing for the neighbors. You have excellent lighting codes that were recently updated that limit the height of the fixtures, ensure there'll be full cutoff. The parking area is oriented towards Old 41 away from the neighbors to help shield light impacts. From just a visual standpoint, we've shown you the storefront. We're going to be well buffered from the 41 right-of-way. We've located our dumpster to be screened in compliance with the Land Development Code, and have located all items on the site to ensure that compatibility. If you haven't been able to view the site, we wanted to take some photos to show you that existing wall, the vegetation on Hawthorne site, as well as looking to our southwest to this TFC 2 zone properties. And this is without our proposed landscape buffering, which would be put in place there as well. I touched on it, Old 41. It's obviously a key focus of the city, something that we certainly look at when adding uses in and along this corridor. We're not within the redevelopment area, and we're a half a mile north of the actual town center, so we are a ways away from it, but we do appreciate we're in the gateway to it. Again, the auto parts store only request here will ensure that you don't get those intensive auto uses too close to your downtown that you're trying to avoid. We've also worked a condition with staff where we'll fully comply with the bike ped master plan. This property does provide some opportunities for bikeways connecting to the Rosemary pathway, and we can work that into our site design as we head towards DO. This will be visually comparable to other existing retail uses already on the corridor, like the Dollar General immediately adjacent to the site. No overhead doors, no auto service. And the star represents where we are in location to your downtown boundary. I'm going to pass it over just for some brief comments by our engineer, Jim Inc., and he's going to talk about a little bit about traffic and access.
Thank you. For the record, James Inc. The two things I'm going to talk about engineering-wise is traffic and drainage. This site is well compatible to having a retail-type store on it. US 41 is a divided highway. We have two entrances on there that goes from US 41 and the other that's into the neighborhood. Traffic generation, just for dramatic purposes, the Auto Parts O'Reilly store is real similar to retail, generating 55 weekday trips, and a fast food drive-through allowable group 3 restaurant is significantly higher. And there's many other uses today that are significantly higher that are allowable within the MPD. So this is just to show that the auto parts store generates a smaller amount of traffic. Conceptual drainage, it's a small site. It's very straightforward. There will be detention on site. It'll meet South Florida requirements. It'll meet Chapter 4 of the City of Bonita Springs requirements. And we will also have to meet the newly adopted stormwater modeling program that Council just adopted recently. So the actual, to meet all the requirements of the Land Development Code is very straightforward, very simple, and is a reason that we did not have to have any of the deviations. Turn it back to Alexis.
Thank you. So just to conclude here, you've had a long day, so I won't belabor. Comprehensive plan consistency is addressed in your staff report. We're in agreement with staff that the proposed use is consistent with the underlying general commercial future land use category. It's a much lower intensity than what is permitted within this category. We've addressed compatibility as well as availability of infrastructure. We are in agreement regarding LDC rezoning criteria, and we have submitted into the record our analysis with the application that states we are in compliance with Chapter 4 of the code relating to rezoning request criteria. We meet or exceed the performance standards. There's available infrastructure. We're consistent with the comp plan, and we've addressed impact on surrounding land uses as well as natural resources. We did have a zoning board recommendation of approval. We did ask for a modification to condition 9A that would allow us to locate our stormwater outfall pipe within that drainage easement that we discussed on the adjacent to the Rosemary Canal, and there was no concern with that addition. So we just want to leave you with conditions have changed since 2003. We've given you a site-specific plan. Your code has been enhanced to address compatibility measures. We know how Hawthorne has built out, and the nature of this auto parts industry and store has evolved as well to be a much cleaner retail use. We would submit that our removal of many of the uses approved today, pharmacy, package store, restaurants, will be a benefit, certainly for this property, and shows the applicant's measure in seeking your approval and limiting other uses that could go on the site today. So it is within our my professional planning opinion that the PD is consistent with your comprehensive plan and land development code, and we would respectfully request your approval today. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, any questions? Fred?
If we approve this as proposed, is this going to permit somebody else to do something down the road or up the road?
This, our request only affects the 1.3 acre tract.
Your acreage.
Oh, yes, sir.
So I was going to ask Derek if we need to do a variance instead, but okay.
It's not a variance issue.
Good.
Okay, Amy? Thank you, Mark.
I have, I think, 3 or 4 questions, starting with your letter, your introductory letter to Ms. Jensen on page 35, where you say, this applicant is requesting an amendment to zone MPD to allow auto parts store as a site-specific approved use in order to construct an O'Reilly's Auto Parts store. After reading that statement, I got confused with what happened later. And I have some questions about the process, because if I remember some of the things that you put up here, you started by saying that this is a new,
Tract.
It's a new what?
Tract.
Tract. So, but it's within a certain already zoning district, which is commercial, right? So if it's in a commercial zoning district, does it has uses associated with that zoning district? Is that correct?
Yes.
So if we didn't do anything, all the uses that are within the commercial zoning district would be available to you, all right? So now I'm beginning to understand what you're saying. I think that first sentence really, because I thought there was discussion in the zoning that you were just applying for one use, which was retail auto. But in fact, you took those entitled uses and removed a certain number of them, and hopefully the ones you removed were the ones that were more intense and more open to traffic and all these other things that we don't want to see, so that in a condition of rezoning later on or redevelopment, any of those uses could be put into this building if O'Reilly is not operating, 10 years from now. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. So what we need to do is say whether we like those new uses, all right, or we don't. That's the first thing. So now I understand the process, which I didn't before. I'd like to also talk about.
You want to make a
I'm sorry, I do just want to.
I'm just a little confused. They're not adding new, they're actually restricting.
Right.
Correct. So that's what I wanted to
Yes.
respond to, is
That's
the only
correct.
new use is the auto parts. So,
I agree.
Okay.
I agree. But even so, because of the discussion following from the zoning meeting, which I listened to twice now, there was an interest in just restricting it to one use, I think. But they didn't vote on it, so I'm just exploring that further. I don't really have a problem with what's going on here. I just wanted to understand what process we're going through, which I don't think was clear at all. I still don't. Even the way it's written in the ordinance where it's all underlined, I don't think, now I get what you're doing. And it's okay. I'm sort of a stickler for process, so I want to make sure that the things that we're doing, I follow. I have a question about on-site installation, which I never would have brought up, except I talked with John earlier. And I know that you restricted it to 3 little things where people from O'Reilly's could come and install those 3 items. All right. But he suggested that what happens sometimes with auto parts stores is that purchasers go get the part, and then they go in the parking lot and they put it in. All right. Is there any way, if it was just a wiper or something like that, it shouldn't be a problem, but we don't want to have clients coming in and doing all kinds of work in your parking lot. Is there any problem that you see with that, or can you restrict it in some way?
No, that's specifically why we included the restriction to just those 3 items. It's not only intended to apply to O'Reilly's employees, but any type of use on the property. So
So a client would not be able to do anything other than that?
Correct.
And you would enforce that with whatever mechanism that you could?
whether we have the right to enforce it, it would be our intention to tell them they can't.
Right, and we would work out something. Okay, I feel better about that. And then I did notice in some of the diagrams, which I think my question's already answered, was how does the building line up with Dollar General? And then you have the parking lot, which is closest to 041, which I think it makes sense. You want to sort of line up the buildings, right? And then
Yes, they are next to each other.
Yeah, they are sort of lined up. And in the front part of it, that's pretty much parking lot plus some buffering. Is that correct? Which is the only logical way to put that in there. Okay, but I didn't know how that would, and then I just want to have a clarification about the bike and pedestrian path. What did you say, that you'd be willing to work on that with the master plan, but it's not, we don't have any of that in the.
It is a condition to the zoning that we will when we do site
So
development.
when you do the development, and then you would include that. Okay, I'm good with everything then, thank you.
Thank you.
I make a motion to approve, and I wish more applicants were like you guys. I loved it, so, sorry.
Second. There's been a motion to approve in a second. Council, is there further discussion?
Public comment.
You want to hear from staff or?
Yeah, we do. But I have a question. It's an odd question, and it just kind of dawned on me. Who is the owner of this franchise? Of this store, I guess I should say. Are they?
I'll let Chris Salemi answer that.
I just, what I want to do, in the abundance of caution, there was a gentleman I met at the swearing-in ceremony of the president, actually close to 4 years ago, that owned about a bunch of O'Reilly Auto Parts in the area, so I'm just disclosing that in the interest of good faith. But obviously, we're not that close. I can't remember his name, so I'm curious as to who this might be.
I'm Chris Salemi with Aileron Investment Management, the applicant. So the O'Reilly stores are all corporately owned, the operation. The real estate is usually owned by individuals. So I will be the owner of the property,
Okay.
build the building, lease it to O'Reilly's.
And you and I didn't meet at the swearing-in? No, sir. I'm positive of that. That's, okay, fair enough. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, Council. I can see where we are in this discussion, and I can make this very brief for you. In the review of this, staff found the application to be consistent with the comprehensive plan and also the standards of the Land Development Code. The only reason we are here is outlined by the applicant. It was specifically removed from the original request, and therefore is really not under our purview to add back in administratively. We allow you to do that. So, based on the presentation and based upon the information that's been provided, we do agree with the applicant's presentation. Just ask that the staff report be included as part of your record. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay. Council? Okay. No? Anything else?
Public comment, if there's any.
Okay, very good. Public comment at this time? Any member of the public that would like to speak on this item? Please come forward. Seeing none, there's been a motion to approve in a second. Derek, anything else?
That's it.
Any Ts or Is? Okay, very good. Roll call, please.
Councilwoman Carr?
Aye.
Mayor Simmons?
Aye.
Councilman Gibson?
Aye.
Councilman Forbes?
Aye.
Councilwoman Carumba?
Aye.
Great. Congratulations. Great job. Thank you.
We like to make things hard here.
What's that?
I said, we like to make things hard.
Yeah.
Confirm the obvious here. The zoning board had recommended approval. The staff report initially had recommended.
Oh, that's right. I'm going to say it's
What I'm
been,
going to assume, and not put words in your mouth, is that you voted to verify the zoning board's recommendation to approve this project.
yes, and let's make that official. I make a motion that we approve exactly what the zoning board recommended, just so there's no question. Is there a second to that?
Second.
Okay, there's been a motion and a second to adopt exactly what the zoning board approved. Is there further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mayor Simmons?
Aye.
Councilman Gibson?
Aye.
Councilman Forbes?
Aye.
Councilwoman Carumba?
Aye.
Councilwoman Carr?
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
It's in the abundance of caution. Thank you, John. All right, motion to approve, to leave, to adjourn? All right. We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody. God bless you. You're sitting there waiting patiently. Okay, I think everybody's here. All right, we'll call this back to order. And we are, now, do you want to kick us off, Arlene, for what we're about to do?
We're going to begin with the budget portion of our agenda. As this is continuation of the meeting, this will allow for council to make decisions during this process as well. We'd like to start off with Ann Wright, our finance director, giving an overview of the city's financials, and we'll try to keep it as brief as possible because we do have items on here that we do need decisions to move forward with some projects.
Ann Wright, Ann Wright, Finance Director. Each of you should have a copy of the PowerPoint that we're going to be going through, and it's going to cover all the items under item 1. So A, B, and C will be covered under that. The green sheets are listed, and we'll move through these quickly. First of all, an important summary of our financial position is really reflected in our fund balance. And what you have on this first slide, or slide number 3, is the preliminary fund balance. I call it preliminary fund balance as of September 30 because our September 30 numbers are subject to audit. Also want to point out that with our fiscal year end being the month of September, these financials reflect certain accruals for some receivables that weren't actually received as of September 30 but came in within 60 days after September 30, and under the method of accounting that we use, it's a 60-day window of what would impact your financial statements as of September 30. So the schedule starts with looking at the total fund balance that existed as of September 30, 2018, which is right off the audited financial statements, and then lists the revenues, transfers in, expenditures, transfers out, to get us to total fund balance as of September 30, 2019. The next section then categorizes our fund balance. And I know that we talk a lot about unassigned fund balance because those are the funds that are available. They're not restricted or haven't been designated for any specific use. So that's at the very bottom line item, last line item before the subtotal for unassigned fund balance for the general fund, the $4.5 million. Also want to mention that within that categorization, and these are the categories that are required to be used in our comprehensive annual financial report that is audited. And so the categories are non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned. But under unassigned, I just want to point out to you that in our budget at a glance on page 5, where we show the summary of our budget in the budget book, we showed that we are using fund balance to help balance our FY 2020 budget. So for purposes of presenting our fund balance, we show that as being assigned to subsequent year's budget because we know that when the budget was passed for FY 2020, we needed to use some fund balance to have that budget balance. And then I also want to mention up above, when you see the restricted categories, all of our special revenue funds, by definition, are restricted revenue because that's why they're categorized as a special revenue fund. There are specific restrictions on the revenue that goes into those funds and that must be used for those purposes. So for purposes of our CAFR, we have to show that fund balance as restricted, but you'll just see it as one line item in the CAFR. I have broken it out here in 3 line items, well actually 4 line items, because I wanted you to be aware of the composition of that number. In some of our funds, you can see we have planned to use some of fund balance in the FY 2020 budget. That's restricted subsequent year's budget. Some of the funds are restricted for capital outlay, which is a carryover that was approved today, the carryover of the prior year's balances. So that's going to help fund the capital projects. And then we have the line item that just is restricted. So those are the funds that are currently in fund balance that have no other designations or restrictions by council for the use. Just wanted to clarify that when we look at our total fund balance, for instance, for road impact fees, it says $20 million, but we really only have $3.8 million that's not already been designated for some other use. Okay? All right, move on. Next slide is just a summary then of what we're saying is unassigned fund balance, knowing that in the special revenue funds, we don't actually call it unassigned, but it's that top number that's available for future use. And you can see that number total of all funds being 18.4 million. Next slide is the history in the general fund of our unassigned fund balance. And again, the September 30 number is asterisk to indicate that it's preliminary, subject to audit. That does give you a feel for comparison. And didn't actually specifically state this yet, but the $6.3 million was actually accrued as an expenditure as of September 30. So the liquidated damages that were paid under the WCI, or economic damages that were paid under the WCI settlement agreement were considered an expenditure as of September 30, 2019.
So that's included in the unassigned fund balance?
It's already taken out.
Already taken out.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And you may remember that there was a higher number in the budget book. Didn't have that crystal ball at that time. And then talking about the impact of litigation, on slide 7, the $5 million liability of $4.989 under the BG mine settlement has not yet been incorporated as an expenditure and in these financial projections. There are various options that can be considered and will be discussed with City Council, but one of the important things that needs to be determined is we are obtaining or receiving land in that transaction, and we need to know the uses of those lands. So what's the value of the land that's going to be used as a park? What's the value of the land that's going to be used for stormwater? Because that can open up the different options of how we can fund that purchase. For instance, the value of the land, possibly park impact fees could be used to fund that portion. The value of the land that's stormwater, maybe the stormwater assessment fee. Consideration to reprioritizing some existing capital projects that we have in the CIP, the capital improvement plan, that are funded with the general fund, could possibly be reprioritized, maybe pushed out into the schedule to make those funds available. And then Derek has indicated that this expenditure would be something that for which we could obtain debt and pay for it with debt and then have debt to repay. I did, just so that you have a basis of understanding that, $5 million at 3% interest over 15 years would be a debt service payment of about $419,000 a year. So if debt was issued for that purpose and the land was used for parks and stormwater, we still could allocate that payment amongst those different funds. A portion of it would be paid by park impact fees, a portion could be paid with stormwater. And then, as just recently mentioned, the $6.3 million economic damage that was actually paid on November 20th, 2019 is shown as that expenditure. And in the green sheet, when you see the September financials, you see that as an expenditure. It's broken out as a separate item, so it's separated out from the operations. The plaintiff legal fees that was on the agenda today and Derek explained will be budgeted from, or will be paid for from the contingency fund. So once that amount is determined and the budget resolution is signed, then we can do a transfer to that appropriate account. Okay, next slide is summary of the general fund balance and the 5-year projection. And you also have the 5-year projection in the big paper, shows all the details of the 5-year projection. But I just copied the bottom section that relates to fund balance. I want to point out something here, because if you start comparing numbers to another slide, the unassigned fund balance on this slide, and it's shown at the bottom of this slide, is $5,124,546, which is that $4.5 million that you saw before is unassigned, plus the $603,652 that was assigned to the subsequent year's budget. And the reason why I added it there is because in the FY20 budget column, it comes out. So if I left it out on 2019, it would actually understate the fund balance because it would be coming out twice. So I just added it back to the projected unassigned fund balance and explained why that's a different amount. But it's because when you work through the mechanics of FY20, you're actually using that fund balance, and it's already, so the $4.3 million that you see projected unassigned fund balance at the end of 2020 is, it makes it work out fine, because it's now being used at 603. Okay, and that does show that, you know, you get a feel for 5 years out, and against, when you go out 5 years, there's more uncertainty, but it shows you where we're projected to be on the unassigned fund balance. Then another area of concern that throughout the hurricane we had was our cash position. I will mention to you that basically fund balance is really the barometer because of the fact that when we fund our capital projects and we set money aside for this capital projects, when it's budgeted, in the year budgeted, the funds are available. And then we carry over those funds, like the resolution today, which was $20 million. That is money that we have in the bank. That was money that's been set aside for those projects that just carries over. So the cash balance will typically be higher than maybe the fund balance because we have those extra funding in the bank, the cash for those prior year budgeted items. So this shows our cash balances as of November 30. Wanted to get the most recent completed month end. And you can see on the general fund, November 30, 2017, out of that 17 million, we would have paid $1,049,000 of hurricane expenses by that time. So that gives you a feel for where we are now with almost being fully replenished on our hurricane expenses. We're at the 19.6. So the 2017 number is shy of being our normal September or November number, except for $1 million, which we would have already paid out for those hurricane expenses. And that brings us to our next section, is the summary of the hurricane expenses. This is a lot of information, but it does incorporate, we've talked about the FEMA, and we brought before you all the resolutions that related to the FEMA funding, but there was some additional funding that we did get that helped with the hurricane expenses. So this chart summarizes all of those. We had a USDA grant that was received, and then we had insurance proceeds. So this chart works through the total cost, and the top section subtotals total cost approved by FEMA, and then the insurance proceeds, because FEMA, you know, we had to deduct that, we had to communicate to FEMA we did receive this funding, and then that brought down the amount that they were considering for reimbursement. And then it shows the total cost allowed for FEMA funding, state funding, and the city portion. The very bottom of the chart, it does a summary so you can see the total cost, the $8.5 million, $8,582,000. What percent was paid for by FEMA? 86.33%, and then goes on down, the city portion being 5.41%. And as mentioned earlier, the total expected is the $7,818,758, and of course 85 cents. Everything is, we get paid the pennies, and we've collected 7.7 as of right now. And the only other thing I'll mention on this chart is the direct administrative costs. That project just was obligated today, and so that means we'll be going through the process of getting those funds. But we also will be getting more funds related to that, and it's a formula, and I won't go into it right now, but it'll be a green sheet, and because council will need to take some actions on how that will be used. And then the next section is just a real quick summary, and this is actually what's on the green sheet, but of our outstanding debt. And slide 15 shows the amortization on the remaining debt. The FY 2020 debt, the road debt, the principal payment is made November 1st, so we've already paid that $2,418,000. That's on the top line there for FY 2020. And that last payment on that debt is November 1 of 2021. Any questions?
Counsel?
Fred. One question. I'm assuming some of these funds that we have that are restricted funds, some of them can be borrowed against, apparently. Because we loaned money to the people that bought the Wonder Gardens, and when that didn't work out, we forgave the note, and then we had to pay the impact fee money back out of operating. Is that right, that you can
That, I'm
borrow
going to
against
defer
somebody?
to our legal on that.
You want to borrow against
just
sources
asking
of
a
repayment?
question.
Or you're talking about internal borrowing?
Yeah.
You can internally borrow against, from one revenue source to another revenue source. But because some of those sources may, as you point out, be restricted, you've got to be really careful about doing that. Is there a specific?
Well, he is correct. It was done.
Bless you.
For the Wonder Gardens
Yeah.
loan. But I think going forward, we
I think that
need
was
to,
a 3-year note.
we need to, yeah, right.
Right, but is there
Consider
a
the facts and
specific
circumstances.
Wouldn't we, if we
source
could
you're looking
borrow,
at?
we'd have to make a regular end-of-the-year payment out of operating or something to replenish, but have a schedule so it's paid off in full within 3 years or something?
Yeah, but is your question relating to a past transfer or to something new for some other source?
Being able to
Just
do
to
it again.
clarify, Derek, you're saying that we could borrow from other funds, but but because each of the fund is a restricted
No, because you may, depending on which source the source is, it
Right.
could be a restricted fund.
Well, but I mean, that's the likely place where you would.
Well-
But we'd have to be sure that the purpose we're using the borrowings for complied with the restrictions on that particular
Correct.
fund. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, so let's say that you were borrowing, and I'm just an example of something we talked about earlier, of $8 million in your building fund. And you say, well, I want to borrow $2 million to build out a planning wing of the building department's offices, to build out new space and to expand that. Well, you might be able to do that and then pay that fund back, so basically it's made whole plus with interest. But the other part of that is the statute that provides for retention of building fees also says you can't use those fees for things such as planning services. So this is as a general rule, yes, you can do inter-fund borrowing and pay those funds back. But we would have to get into any specific request and look at it on an individualized basis.
And in an interfund borrowing, that would be a temporary cash flow issue that I would see that being applicable,
Yeah.
because it doesn't give you any budgetary authority. So in other words, if there was something that you needed to purchase from the general fund, let's say it was a purchase of equipment that was $1 million, you need to have a budget for that. By borrowing money from another fund, it doesn't give you a budget because it's not a permanent funding
Yeah,
source.
right. But I guess my question, when we loaned that money to the people to buy the Wonder Gardens, Derek, was that legally, I don't want.
I don't know the specifics.
And I don't want you to answer, probably.
Yeah.
Jesus.
But I think, could we borrow, say, $5 million that we have to pay on one of the lawsuits out of the building fund, and instead of, borrowing it from a bank, and then just pay back that fund at 0 interest?
I'm not sure about that particular example, but yes, the answer is what you can borrow, especially internally on the short term, while you're setting up a process. So one of the things that Ann and I have discussed is, yes, the purchase of some of the land we're getting and the settlement for the BG mine
Yeah.
came out of a lawsuit settlement, And there are elements of it that may have to do with perceived damages by the plaintiffs in that case, but it's also, we are buying assets. And we are trying to look at, we want those assets for particular ends, the parklands, things like that. So we're establishing a basis in those. We're trying to figure out what part of that amount of money is established for each of those things. And then, once we've said this is going to be for park purposes, can we use the park impact fees to pay for it? Can we, so we're trying to take an item that under the totality looks like it was all part of a lawsuit issue, but what we got in that lawsuit was not tied to the fundamentals of the lawsuit. We are getting an asset that we wanted towards a goal that was for a public purpose. So we're going to find how we can borrow, where we borrow, what funds to pay that back to give us the cash flow we need.
But she said that, you had said that we could borrow, we could go into debt to buy it, but instead of paying 3% to the bank, could we do 0% to the building fund, is what I'm asking.
Maybe. The answer is maybe. I need to look at the specific sources, and we haven't delineated what amount of money it falls into which public pots.
I was just going to say, and to keep you on the hot seat a little bit longer, but no.
That's why I'm here.
But what can those funds be used for? Or you're still saying we don't know?
I would like to.
I'm not,
Yeah, you're talking about the building fund in particular. Well, one, we're paying it down because we're addressing that issue with a state statute says we have to burn through it. John's already got plans for what he wants to do to try and use some of those funds for valid purposes. We're going to try to reduce the rest. If there's a possibility we can use some of that money without burning it through fee reductions, then we're absolutely, that's what we've been exploring. But the way that the statute that requires us to burn off that surplus is set, I don't know that it allows you to say, it allows you to calculate your operating versus your reserves, but maybe not for debt purposes. So that's the part that really complicates it, because the statute's telling us to reduce that amount we have in overage, and it's not saying to borrow against it in order to reduce it. So that I shouldn't have started with that example. I just want to start with something we'd have been talking about, but there are other funds, and of course, then the issue is it's all about cash flow. So maybe. Right now we're using our communications tax. So when that starts to free up, those may be good places to borrow against for short-term purposes. But we have options.
And I guess obviously, and this is a workshop, so we're just having a discussion. Not to cross-reference a city council meeting as opposed to a workshop, but I guess here we are. No, I understand.
You can take.
But what I'm saying is, to my own self-detriment here, is if with John, if we can drill down and find out exactly what we need to do to comply with the state statute, obviously, but also drill down on what we can do with those funds. Because to have $7 million sitting there, I have zero interest in seeing it sit there when it can be used for other purposes. Right. There, I've said it. Thank you, Ann. Hello. Any other questions for Ann, or any other? No? We're good? Okay, thank you so much.
And with that, continuing with the overall financial picture, I just wanted Derek to just complete an overview of where we are with our legal obligations as well. I think we've taken some action today.
You owe me money now.
Yeah. No, we've taken some action today. You've given the mayor the authority to sign a budget resolution for the legal fees. We've paid the $6.3 million, and we do have a.
So the only two so we have a not to exceed amount that if Lennar WCI is in agreement with some of the other items we've addressed, the waiver, we withdraw our challenge to the one lawsuit, or what I'll call the attorney's fees for fees case, and we'll come up with an agreed amount on the remaining about $600,000 in attorney's fees that the arbitration decision authorizes them to receive. That would cut the bleeding off, because if we can't come to a mutual agreement on those fees, then the court still retains jurisdiction for us to litigate about that. And of course, any fees that we spend litigating that will come out of your pocket, and we'll have to pay for WCI's fees. So that's the first one. The second item is, and the way we've set it up with the BG mine, is we have several additional contingencies coming forth with that project. So you'll hear a little bit later today on the IPD rezoning application that they had submitted previously. That's to allow them to continue and change some terms of their existing mine. In the spring, you're going to see a plan, an agreed upon plan amendment and map amendment for the mine itself, which will allow the mine to continue until such time as the up to 700 homes are built within that project. At that time, once everything has been done on the entitlements, then we will take possession of the park, the easement on the northern lake, and we'll have a period of time for inspections and review before we close on the property known as Bonita 278, which is 248 acres that we'll be looking to use as a stormwater and water quality facility. That's the outstanding amount of that is $498,000 would be the purchase price for that, but that is the only remaining outstanding legal obligation we have.
Maybe we should be talking about this in the next section, but in what, this first step we're taking, if nothing else happens, if we don't, we don't finish the rest of what we had negotiated, then are we in a worse position by agreeing to this?
If we, if any of the steps that are still laid forth to avoid a WCI-like situation,
right.
If we fail to meet any of those obligations, or they fail to meet the obligations, the entire agreement essentially implodes, and the parties go back to their pre-agreement status.
The original,
The
including
original
the one we're
status.
going to vote on today?
No, not the one. If the one you vote on today is approved, and I suspect, and I'll let them speak for themselves during the zoning hearing, the reason why they want that is because that would guarantee them the continued rights under the mine if we don't approve the entitlements for the residential.
But subsequent ones would have the fallback position to whatever's agreed to today.
So let's say there's 3 steps left. At each step, whatever, if we fail to move forward, then what's been agreed to thus far stays in place, and we litigate whatever's left.
Okay,
So we don't have to pay, the money was the last thing we wanted. That's the last contingency. So we don't pay the money until everything else is done.
Okay, thank you.
Arlene?
The next item I wanted to review with you, and I'm not asking for decisions today, but we did want to bring back forward to you the 2018-2019 strategic priorities, and just wanted some direction. It is helpful for us to have them adopted into the new year as far as grant application purposes and other discussions we have with our local jurisdictions when we are able to say that these are the adopted priorities. So we would like to bring it back on a consent agenda item for approval, unless we wanted to give the time in case any of these you would like to see adjusted or worked on or further updated. Additionally, we do know that after March, there'll be some additional members to the board. It would be under the board's discretion whether or not you would want another strategic priority session like we did previously in 2018, and I'll leave that at that time for your discussion. But in the interim, if there's anything that you'd like to see updated or changed, if you could contact me, we'd like to bring that forward for a discussion. And if not, we would bring that to the beginning of the year for a consent agenda item so that this could be continued as the path forward with the applications and things that we put forward.
Okay.
Okay, so for the next section, what we've, in essence of time, we've gone into the capital improvements portion of the budget, and we're breaking them down through strategic priorities. And the first one we'd like to go forward with you is stormwater. So Matt is going to cover, as you see, you'll have a green sheet A, B, C, and D. A and B are items that we would need action from council on as well, but.
Stormwater.
Yes.
All right.
This is which green sheet are we referring to?
He is going to cover in his presentation A, B, C, and D in the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Discussion of strategic priority number 1, improve stormwater management. But Mayor, you do have members of the public I know who have interest in these topics, and so
Sure.
if you wanted to, we did not unfortunately provide an opportunity for public comment, but you are going to take action on some of these items.
No, that's great. And if it's okay with the council, after Matt gives his presentation and we have a dialogue, would it be good at that point to allow members to speak of the public? I think that would be great. Council, we're okay with that? Great. Thanks. And just to be clear, we're going to, well, of course, it'll be up here in a moment, but just so everybody knows. So we're on the same page, literally and figuratively. How's that? Matt's going to start us off with a picture, okay?
Thank you.
As always. Good afternoon, Matt Finney, Assistant City Manager, all. We have some traction, which the green sheets are reflective of some of our LMS HMGP grant applications. So the LMS is the Lee County Local Mitigation Strategy. It's a laundry list of projects that the communities in a working group of municipalities and jurisdictions have ranked for hazard improvement. It can be for flood control, it can be fire control, etc. So after Hurricane Irma, we listed quite a few projects and amended our capital improvement plan to reflect those. We went on to model some of them, and I wanted to give you an update on the ones that we have received either notification from FEMA of contracts or are expecting more activity from FEMA to come forward. So the first that I want to talk about is the Spring Creek Restoration project. This is what the LMS application included, which was a project that could provide for connectivity of flows from east of Interstate 75 through the golf course in the Paradise Road area and then on into Spring Creek. So the project ask, which did include some dollars for land acquisition, was $9.9 million of FEMA. They have reviewed it, taken a look, and they've given us a notice of award for the first phase of that project. That is, I think that's green sheet A on the list. So that contract would include monies to do some further modeling and then basically project design. Assuming a cost benefit of the project design is deemed beneficial, FEMA would then move on into authorizing the dollars of the $9.9 million ask for acquisition and construction. The city's share is anticipated to be $2.475 million, and that is in our current year's budget. So this project was one that we recently modeled with a citywide modeling effort that updated our ICPR 4 model and looked at some regional projects to see what possible benefits are. So some preliminary modeling has been done is what I'm referring to. So we looked at this. Part of the modeling concept looked at interconnected lakes along the golf course property, new upstream culvert crossings to include underneath the interstate, as well as increased capacity, increased size culverts on the downstream side. The results that we got back from that modeling effort were that we do see, if we were to implement a project along those lines, some pretty significant improvements. The elevation here, I believe, is a 13. My eyes are maybe starting to fail. But if you use the 13 and you look at, this is the existing condition, and this would be after you implemented this, what we see is an overall drop in the elevation of the stage of the water. It's lesser here. But we also see a significant reduction in the duration that you're above that flooding elevation. So this project is contemplated in the model, and obviously further modeling would refine this. We anticipate here in this scenario about a 70% reduction over a 5-day period of evaluation for flood conditions. And that's pretty exciting for something along these lines. The second.
You have a question, Laura?
I was just wondering what the different colors meant.
Oh, let's see if I have that in the. You know, I threw that slide out.
No, there it is.
No, it's not. There's another diagram that looks very similar to this. It looks like a wire diagram in the report that I handed out to council last week. I'd be happy to sit with you. But what the colors represent are nodes. The model is like a wire diagram. It looks similar to this, but it's different points. And so What these different colors are indicating is height.
No, I'll meet you, I'll come and talk to you.
Okay. Yes.
I do have a question, but you probably are not going to like. No, but we know that this project is included in the Lee County study. So my question is, where does Lee County come into this? Can we rely upon them to help us? Will they just help us to get the funding, or will they participate in any way, or do we want them to, or what's the story?
I think those are all valid questions that, we haven't explored. The county's modeling effort, they modeled a much more comprehensive area, obviously countywide. They worked very hard to calibrate it. Some of our consultants were involved in review of it. This project is in their model, but we don't know their results yet. So, no, we do not. They're just starting that phase of the process. We figure by early spring we'll start to see their results. But, from what we're seeing, we don't expect anything significantly different from what we were able to see in the models, in our model. So,
But the purpose of their study was just to figure out what should be done. Was it also for them to prioritize some projects that they would participate in?
So they looked from a flood control perspective, and to start, we had a similar, microcosm of that here in the city. That's this study, and I should mention the consultants will come after the first of the year and give you a more comprehensive discussion of their results. But you kind of have to refine your existing model or build a model. In our case, it was refining what we had and working on the inputs. In the counties, it was also a refinement effort. So they refined their model, they identified conceptual projects, and the model refinement has taken the better part of a year. It's a large, and so they're now pushing those projects in to see what valuation, what results they get. And then, yes, there will be some form of prioritization. And really the questions you've asked are remain to be seen as to what the outcomes
Be determined.
Thank you for that, Matt. And Amy, yeah, I was just going to say, because I know Fred's.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, in this next phase of modeling, could we also look at what can we buy if we put waterproof mounding around some of these ponds?
I think what we would, this ask through FEMA is for something that is by and large part what you see here. It's acquisition of the golf course and moving through. I think to your point, what would be included in that is looking at whether you constructed a containment berm around a proposed lake. And yes.
That's what I'm asking.
Okay.
It's got to be waterproof.
And Amy, I'm sorry, did you have a
Sorry.
question?
No,
Okay.
and I thank you for the effort of that modeling. I did read it at least 3 times, and I think I finally got it. But thank you for all that technical information that you dropped in our. No, it's excellent work. Seriously, it's hard to understand though, so we're looking forward to it.
It is very technical, and I do want to point out that you're going to see a lot of relative reference here. So this reference about 5 days, for folks that are watching at home saying, well, I had water for a longer period of time. We're referencing in a modeled environment that was looking at really the 10 days around, I think it's 21 days from the storm out. And we're referencing known flood elevations. So people may have seen more water because if you pick a line lower on this, it will be longer. But what was significant, and I'll let our consultants speak to it, is if you can see the span that this is over, and the span that this is, there's 2 significant things, and I didn't speak to the other one. This one's moving more water through the system because you have connections underneath the interstate. So for that span to drop down, as well as for the elevation to drop down, the duration is the span, with more volume moving through, that's a pretty significant result. So the next project that we have a pending contract, I believe it's item number B on the agenda.
Green sheet
Item letter. Green sheet 309 is the Logan Boulevard flowway. So this is a $2.3 million ask, and again, this is the contract is a similar type contract. It's for additional modeling. So we've done some broad brushstroke modeling. This would be another round of modeling, but really it takes it to the design. So the design is what we, when we build projects in the public works realm, you have to have design plans, and both of these are to do additional modeling and then move to the design. So the next steps are construction and implementation. This project would be $1.7 million in FEMA funding with a $587,000 ask. That money was actually budgeted last year, and with the action that you took today by moving the carryover, it is now in this year's budget.
And given the timing of everything, we're good with?
Modeling always helps.
Okay. We'll leave it at that for now.
So what we did model at the broader level with the study that was recently completed are really two projects. One is a more regional project, which we were able to not foreclose the idea when we constructed Logan Boulevard. We were able to build about a mile-long system that really is a borrow pit for material for the roadway, but could be converted to a conveyance. We also, along those lines, installed dual 4x10 box culverts underneath the roundabout intersection. They basically lay right off the page here in this image, so that we could intercept flows from the northeast that are moving to the southwest that may have historically flowed on down south and not really into the imperial system, and move those flows then down in and into the Cocohatchee River system down south. Now, I will point out that would require regional coordination. We don't want to cause and can't cause, quite frankly, any issues for our neighbors to the south, and it would require a lot of continued coordination. I think the modeling of this grant funding would help us along those lines to further understand what that idea would be. In addition, let me go back. So the blue is kind of showing what the flow would move. This is what people call the Kiel Canal. It's basically the Imperial River if you move further to the west. This would intercept it through the box culverts and then on down across the county line. The other project we modeled was a smaller version of the same concept. And that really, this is the wire diagram that I was kind of referring to before. This is the model. That project is in periods of high flow to isolate the communities that drain traditionally, or that are piped to drain to the Imperial River system that are south of Bonita Beach Road, construct some form of isolation, a gate, an operable gate, that would allow, when the Imperial River is high, for those rainwater that lands on those communities to actually be redirected, the way this arrow is, south and on down into the Cocohatchee River system. It's a much smaller volume of water. The results from that in this modeling effort were very promising, and I'll move on to that. So the larger project, the regional flowway concept that takes water from north of Beach Road, what we're seeing is that we could potentially reduce 2 days of flooding conditions above an elevation of 12, which would reduce 2 days out of a 7-day period, or a 28% reduction. Truthfully, we were looking at a small window of time, really to understand what the results or impacts of a project like that would be. The modeling that would come forward with this would allow for a better understanding of how that could benefit or not the community. The smaller project, I think it's the same elevation here, it might be 13. What we see is we can achieve about an 81.5% reduction over a 5.4-day period, which is about 4.5 days less of flooding above an elevation of 13. So, as I mentioned before, if you observe flooding in those communities, it may be above a higher elevation, but that is significant in this environment, and would probably provide a pretty tangible benefit to the communities that are south of Beach Road that have experienced chronic water. So those are the two that were in the modeling effort. There is a third concept, and as I mentioned, the folks will talk about those when we have them back at the first of the year. Pine Lake Preserve was also an ask. This is a partnership we've had with Lee County on a 2020 piece of property. It is fully designed. It was designed by the county. We've received state approval, and they have basically forwarded it to FEMA. So that one we will expect probably by the first of the year or shortly thereafter, a contract coming back. Its dollars were actually in, I believe, the 2017 budget. So they were carried forward with the carryover action that you took as well. And that was the $237 match on what was estimated to be a $950,000 project. And then the final project that we're getting some inquiry, there's been no approval, has been this larger land acquisition in the DRGR. It's representative of acquiring these properties here on a willing seller basis. It would require a fairly sizable match from the city, and we have reached out. This is representative currently of about 2 property owners in the blue shape here, and one of the property owners' agents, we made them aware, because we're asking, and it is a voluntary program, but I'm not so confident that there'll really be a willingness or an interest to participate with us. So
We did not specifically obligate directly obligate for this match, the city's match, but you do have a line item in stormwater capital improvement projects for land acquisition for stormwater purposes, and that was anticipated if the need occurred for a potential grant or any other properties that you could utilize that funding. So it wasn't directly, and that amount was $2,671,936.
Any cents or just even?
Just even.
Just checking.
A point on this, any of these improvements we've talked about from Logan Boulevard, rehydration of Pine Lake Preserve, the other potential thing of acquiring land from willing sellers, we're going to actually retain water, and the more water we retain, guess what? That helps the people upstream. Upstream is Lee County. We have some minor leverage by using that psychology with them. It actually helps them. If we don't do it, they're like they are right now. They got to figure out how to retain it.
I do want to point out that any of these that require land acquisition, of which there's 2,
Yeah.
It's voluntary in nature, and the funding really is capped on the FEMA side of it, what's been represented here. So, for example, if a landowner, ultimately is looking for something more than what was contemplated in the ask, that would fall on the city's shoulders, or some funding partnership to.
And the grant
achieve.
application includes $5 million for land acquisition. The remaining funds are to be used for infrastructure. So the planning, modeling, and infrastructure.
On this one.
On the Spring Creek restoration.
Well, I think that's what I have.
Great job. Council, any questions or comments?
I guess you'll be around for a while and we get all these projects.
So just,
This is a lifetime job now.
I do want to point out, we did not, and it might be what Arlene was going to say, but when we applied for these and put them on the LMS list, the intent was for some, we knew some were probably likely candidates, like Pine Lake. It was already designed at that point. But the reaction and the responses that we've been getting through FEMA, although it's 2 years later, some of these projects, I did not think we would have this level of support, funding commitment, or interest. So it's been a surprisingly positive result for the city. Now we just have to pay for it.
No, absolutely. And I think, it's the can-do attitude is doing. The can-do attitude, the positivity, the team effort, the working together.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention Ellie Soto McEwen.
Absolutely.
She's worked very
She's
hard on
part of the
this,
team.
and our GIS
Absolutely.
with Courtney Gordon. They've all worked to put these things together. So.
Right.
And great job.
Great work. Absolutely great work. Good job, Matt. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
I remember the meeting that you said, well, we're going to ask, but we'll never get, you were like, no way. And so
Forget the Irish guilt, Feeney. Forget the Irish guilt. Charge forward, buddy. You're doing a great job.
Yeah. Good job. So, Mayor, we do need action on the green sheet ending in 374 and the green sheet ending in 389, and I do know you have members of the public here as well.
No, absolutely. I was going to say, so at this point, council, are we good? Should we let, or open it up to comments? Okay, great. Any member of the public that'd like to speak, please come forward. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You're part of our team. You always are and have been and will be.
Ben Hershenson, Golf and Country Club area. First of all, to Matt and Ellie, my gosh, what a fantastic piece of work. I'm really quite impressed. I think you folks have been busy the last few weeks, to say the least. So I'll tell you, as a member of this community, as a taxpayer, kudos to you both and all for bringing us at this point. With respect to the golf course area, that this is kind of predicated on a lot of assumptions, obviously. And the assumption is that things work into place where the acquisition of that land is actually feasible. And I know that I won't get the answer to this today, but if we could get information as to an update as to can all of these things fall into the right holes over the next several weeks or months to make it really happen. Because all this modeling is excellent. I think the people would be, anybody who's watching, cannot help but be excited about the potential just with that limited modeling that was just exhibited. But again, for me, all I can say is I hope whatever needs to be done, be it public, with private funding, whatever, some creative financing, to make this very essential project have a beginning, a middle, and a constant update over the years to come. I think this is absolutely critical to that section of the city, and I'm very optimistic at this particular point that somehow it's all going to come to happen. So whatever, you folks have a tough decision to make ultimately, and I hope that you would all work together and put yourselves in the same mindset that it's what's best for the whole city. This is a major part of the city. We need to do this, and I'm really hoping that things really work out. And again, thanks, Matt and Ellie, this fantastic job.
Great. Thank you. Other members of the public that would like to speak? Please come forward. I do have a question. Our water tax, as I call it, I guess, or what is that generated to date?
To date, and all that.
Here comes Ann. Hello, Ann.
I've been tracking it, $1.2 million.
1.2 million just sitting there, along with our 7 million in fees just sitting there. So we got 8.2 million kind of just hanging out. Is that right? Waiting for direction?
Got 1.2 for stormwater.
We got 1.2 for stormwater and 7 million over in John Domer's world sitting there. So, okay. And we've had all but $100,000 of the FEMA money come back, correct? Great work, team. Great, great work. Dynamite. Council, what's your pleasure? Arlene?
Move the two. Do we do these individually?
You can do them together. It's
Okay, I move that we accept the funds and move forward with the projects under Green Sheet 374 and Green Sheet 389.
Second.
Motion to approve in a second. Council, is there further discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilwoman Carumba?
Aye.
Councilwoman Carr?
Aye.
Mayor Simmons?
Aye.
Councilman Gibson?
Aye.
Councilman Forbes?
Aye.
Fantastic. Great. Arlene, yes.
Thank you, Mayor. That's the only section we had today. We'd like to bring back at another time to go through the transportation strategic priority next. We thought, not today, we thought we could break each of these up and go through each of the capital improvements that way and continue to prioritize the projects so that we can be on the same page for this upcoming calendar year as we apply for future grant opportunities.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Great. Great work, team. Great work. Okay, so we're going to adjourn, and we're going to move on to zoning, correct? And I'm just going to give members of the public just last call. Anybody else from the public that would like to speak? Please come forward.
Thank you for your vote on these resolutions.
Great. Thank you. Okay, any other members of the public? Okay, we are adjourned, and why don't we just take a quick 5-minute break, and we'll start zoning at 1:10. Thanks, everybody.